Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We are about to enter what I think is the Wild West, and that is predicting this Texas A&M depth chart week one against Notre Dame. And, we've talked a lot about this Texas A&M program over the last couple of weeks and months, and the number one thing that we always continue to say is there are position battles in depth all over this Texas A&M roster heading into 2024, and there's a ton of new faces. And what you're hearing out of fall camp is that they're still trying to figure out and iron out what some of these rotations are going to look like. In 2 weeks out from kickoff, we're going to do our best to predict what this depth chart shakes out to be week one of 2024. Really excited to get into this one. Now, before we do it, as always, one massive shout out to the Texas A&M fans. This has been a program that's been a blast to talk about all off season long. The amount of support y'all show means the absolute world. Much more importantly, would love to get some feedback from you guys in the comment section. I know every single Texas A&M fan that's listening to this, 2 weeks out predicting depth charts, y'all have been tuned in to the fall camp notes. Would love to hear some of your input, where your disagreements are, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of different ways that this depth chart could shake out week one against Notre Dame. So would love to hear from you guys as well. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with some easier ones, right? Connor Wigman, quarterback one, heading into 2024 at the running back position. We expect Lavian Moss and Mari Daniels to be those two kind of bell cow running backs for Texas A&M. Now, I would say we've had this conversation, right? EJ Smith, a guy that I think is kind of getting slept on, and not as much anymore with their injury to Ruben Owens. The healthy EJ Smith that we've seen periodically at Stanford, really, really good running back. I wouldn't be surprised if EJ Smith factors in more than what we kind of expected maybe 2 months ago before fall camp started. Potentially a guy like Terry Bussey getting worked in as a just offensive weapon in that Texas A&M backfield. Going to the wide receiver position, I think this is where it gets interesting, where on the screen right here, and I probably should have prefaced this, this is not my depth chart that we see on the screen right now. This is just a visual, and so we're going to be making some significant changes to that depth chart. The wide receiver position that we see on the screen, I think, are going to be your starting wide receivers week one. Jade Walker, Noah Thomas, Moose Muhammad. That being said, I think there are going to be a lot of other guys that play roles. Obviously, with Barber coming back from injury, I expect him to play a big role in this Texas A&M passing attack. But, Micah Tease, he's getting a lot of buzz within fall camp. Cyrus Allen, a guy that can really stretch the field. I think what's so fascinating about Texas A&M's wide receiver room is you got a lot of different guys that can do different things, right? Jade Walker, a little bit more of that complete wide receiver, smooth mover, can operate after the catch, can create separation. Noah Thomas, I would probably argue the most physically gifted wide receiver in this room. Moose Muhammad, kind of 7'11", always open. He's going to be, I think, a guy that might lead Texas A&M in targets and receptions in 2024 as that kind of safety blanket for Connor Wigman. But you kind of make no mistake about it. I think these are your three starting wide receivers, but we're going to see a lot of Cyrus Allen. I think we might see a lot of Micah Tease. At the tight end position, I'm going to go with Trey Watson, the transfer from Fresno State. From what I've heard out of fall camp, and again, there's not been a ton of buzz. Donovan Green maybe still kind of working back from that injury that he suffered 12 months ago. So I'm going to go with Trey Watson, a guy that's played a lot of football, was really productive for Fresno State in 2023. But I think Donovan Green, as he continues to kind of get back to full strength and kind of get back to that form we saw as a true freshman, I think he'll probably be the tight end once he gets to that point. Now, on the offensive line, this is where the kicker kind of comes in, where let's start left to right. Left tackle, Trey Zune, no question marks about that. Left guard, Chase Basantis, no question marks about that. At the center position, it sounds like it's going to be the Utah transfer at center, which kicks Mark Naboo out to guard. And then at right tackle, it sounds like it's going to be Armaj Reed Adams. At least that's what they're running with during fall camp. I think the big advantage of bringing in a guy like Reed Adams from Kansas is he gave you that versatility. And so if Ruben Fothery doesn't really get back to that form that we saw when he was fully healthy, a guy that we kind of thought was going to be an NFL tackle, Armaj Reed Adams can give you really quality reps at that right tackle position. He played the back half of the season for Kansas at the right tackle spot. So that's what I think it might be to open the year. Again, I think the big puzzle piece to this is Reuben Fothery. And do you get a Reuben Fothery that we saw before all the injuries started to happen? Because I think that can be a really good tackle. But if you don't, now again, I think Armaj Reed-Adams coming in from Kansas can kind of give you that flexibility either at guard or tackle. Sounds like he might be the starter at right tackle week 1 for Texas A&M. And again, I don't hate Mark Naboo at guard. And then again, you have some versatility within this Texas A&M offensive line that you can really push to get your best starting 5, which is one of those reasons I'm kind of a believer in Texas A&M's offensive line taking that step in 2024 with the versatility. It helps you get your best starting 5 out on the football field. That's probably what I think it's going to be. So it's a recap because there was a lot of words there. Trey Zune at left tackle, Chase Basantis at left guard, the Utah transfer at center, right guard Mark Naboo, Reed-Adams at the right tackle spot. Now going over to the defense, this is really where it gets kind of wild. Now let's start in the secondary where I think it is truly, I think every single position has been up for grabs during Texas A&M's fall camp. And I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a position group that it's all up for grabs because you don't have enough good players that are taking that starting spot. I think it's more up for grabs because you got a lot of good football players and we're just kind of waiting to see who wins these position battles. Starting out at that nickel corner spot, I'm going to go Dalton Brooks. I go back to that bowl game against Oklahoma State and with the Bryce Anderson moving back to safety. So again, the step chart not right. I think Dalton Brooks is your starting nickel. I think that's his best place that you can play him because you look at Dalton Brooks and say, one, he's an extremely physical defensive back. He's got really good short area quickness. Haven't played running back at high school. I want him in the tackle box. I want him at the line of scrimmage, getting involved in the run game, working on some bigger bodied wide receivers. So I'm going to go Dalton Brooks at the nickel. I think your 2 safeties are going to be Bryce Anderson and probably Trey Jones, but I would keep an eye on Marcus Ratcliffe. I haven't heard a ton of buzz of Marcus Ratcliffe, coming out of fall camp, but I was really impressed with what he could do at San Diego State in terms of the versatility that he brought to that defensive back room. I think Marcus Ratcliffe's going to get on the football field, but I think they're going to go with the redshirt senior Trey Jones and Bryce Anderson at the safety spots. And then boundary cornerback, I'm going to lean right there, and emphasis on the word lean, Tyreek Chappelle and Will Lee. Will Lee, I think, can be a really good football player. I think he might be one of the more important players to this Texas A&M roster, where if you get the best version of Will Lee, I think you're getting a top 100 pick in the NFL draft. I think Will Lee is that good. He's long, he's fast, he can make plays on the football. The consistency at Kansas State was only a question mark in the 2023 season, but the flashes were really high. If Mike Elko, that defensive back coaching staff, can get Will Lee playing a little bit more consistent, I think you're getting a really good boundary cornerback there. That's kind of how I have it shaken out. So your boundary cornerbacks, Tyreek, Will Lee, Bryce Anderson, and Trey Jones at safety. And then I'm going to go Dalton Brooks at that nickel corner spot. Linebacker room, Torian York, lock. The big question for Texas A&M in this linebacker room is who's going to be playing next to Torian York. I think there's some fascinating news coming out of Texas fall camp. That's Damian Sanford, maybe emerging as that starter next to Torian York. Now, it's going to be a young linebacker room, but you kind of brought in Scooby Williams. You brought in Solomon DeShields to kind of elevate the floor of that linebacker room. And we always said this throughout spring and fall was, hey, if Damian Sanford is a guy that wins that position battle, you know that he's going to be a pretty good linebacker because Solomon DeShields is a good linebacker. Scooby Williams, although inconsistent at Florida, can be a really good linebacker. And so I think there are enough good bodies in the room to kind of just assume that that linebacker too is going to be at least solid for Texas A&M. And Damian Sanford's a fascinating kid that, when he committed to Texas A&M in the 2023 class, played a lot of that edge rusher role, which is not too rare for off-ball linebackers to play in high school because you're the best football player on the field. You want to be rushing the passer. But there were going to be some growing pains in terms of him moving back to that off-ball linebacker spot. It sounds like Damian Sanford has certainly been a guy that is starting to put it together. This is a kid that has a lot of juice, has a track and field background. I kind of like the idea of going real young here with Torian York and Damian Sanford. And if Damian Sanford maybe struggles early, you got 2 veterans in Solomon DeShields and Scooby Williams that have played a lot of football at the Power 5 level. Going to the defensive line. Now, the projected starters, here's my take on the defensive line. Texas A&M fans know I think this unit's going to be really, really good for Texas A&M. everybody wants to talk about Nick Scorton, Shamar Turner, and Shamar Stewart. I think what makes this Texas A&M defensive line so fascinating is that it's not only NFL caliber talent, guys that I think are going to go potentially first round in the NFL draft. It's also really deep. And so let's predict the starting defensive line first, and then we'll go to looking at some of the depth. Nick Scorton, I think, is a bona fide starter. Albert Regis at the nose, that's going to be kind of I'm interested to see how Texas A&M works it out because I think losing McKinley Jackson is a big deal. And McKinley Jackson was really good at the job he was asked to do for Texas A&M. Albert Regis is a guy that I don't think is going to be a big flashy name, but I think he can do that job. I think DJ Hicks certainly could be pushing Albert Regis for a lot of those reps at that nose tackle spot. And again, you talk about depth, having a former top 10 national recruit going into year 2 as your secondary guy in the rotation, you feel pretty good about that. At the defensive tackle spot, more of that 3-tech going Shamar Turner, Gabriel Brown-Ladindi. And then at the other edge position, I'm going to go Shamar Stewart. I think Shamar Stewart's going to be the guy that plays a little bit more, especially on first and second down. And then on those third and long situations, that's when you see someone like Cassius Howell come onto the football field where, Cassius Howell is an elite pass rusher. I have question marks about Cassius Howell stopping the run against some teams in the SEC. That's fine. Just play Shamar Stewart there. And then when it's time to rotate guys like Cassius Howell in, you're getting him on the field where he kind of fits best, and that is rushing the passer. And then you start looking at the depth. I got to shout out a guy like Rylan Kennedy, up to 240 pounds. This kid came into Texas A&M as a freak show athlete. He would kind of look like a basketball player, though, right? 6'5", maybe even 6'6", 210, 220 pounds. We always knew that he had to put on some weight. You look up at the depth chart, 240 pounds. Rylan Kennedy now, as a freshman, looked like a basketball player with football and with pads and a helmet on. I think Rylan Kennedy now looks like a football player that can rush the passer in the SEC. I think he can provide some real depth to this defensive line for Texas A&M. So again, not only does Texas A&M have that legitimate NFL talent in Nick Scorton, Shamar Stewart, and Shamar Turner, and Cassius Howell, and DJ Hicks, Gabriel Brown-Ladindi. I mean, those guys I think are all going to be playing in the NFL. I think they're also – we just listed, 6-7 guys, but I think you also have a lot of guys that you can continue to rotate in. What made Michigan so good on the defensive line last year was how deep they were, how fresh they could keep those defensive linemen. I think Texas A&M can do a very similar thing in 2024 season. That's how I have this depth chart shaken up. Again, a lot of different ways you could go with this. I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section as well. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.